Have you ever wondered why so many love stories, no matter how they begin, seem destined to end at the altar? We start with passion, with butterflies in the stomach, with nights where time seems suspended, and yet, almost as if following a hidden script, that intensity slowly shifts into something else. An agreement, a contract, a promise sealed not only by affection, but by law, family, and social expectation. Why does love in its rawest form so often lead to marriage? Picture this. Two people meet, feel an immediate spark, and say things like, "I don't need a piece of paper to prove my love." And yet, a few years later, the same couple is debating wedding venues, budgets, and guest lists. What happened along the way? Is marriage truly a natural expression of love, or is it the result of forces we rarely dare to question? This question is not just about relationships, it's about life itself. Because behind it lies a tension we all feel, the conflict between desire and structure, between passion and stability, between what we want and what society expects from us. And it is within this gap that most of our frustrations and disillusions with love are born. Niccolò Machiavelli, the Florentine thinker often misunderstood as merely cynical, understood something profound about human relationships. Affection alone rarely sustains itself. He observed that in politics, as in personal life, raw passion is unstable. It must be anchored in something larger, institutions, agreements, duties. Could it be that love follows the same logic? That it seeks marriage not because marriage is romantic, but because love itself, left alone, cannot survive? Think about your own experiences or the people you know. How many times has love started strong only to fade once the rush of passion declined? And how many times has the decision to marry not been about love's intensity, but about the need to transform it into something more permanent, something that might resist time, temptation, and human fragility? This is where our journey begins, questioning not the beauty of love, but its inevitable transformation. If you've ever felt this tension in your own relationships, if you've ever wondered whether marriage is the natural flowering of love or its slow death, you are in the right place. Because what we will explore today may not only change how you see relationships, but also how you see yourself. And before we go further, I want you to pause and tell me in the comments, do you believe love naturally leads to marriage, or is marriage a social cage we step into? And of course, if these reflections already resonate with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Because what comes next might challenge everything you thought you knew about love. What if love did not need to end in marriage? Imagine for a moment a world where two people could live their passion fully, without the pressure of legal contracts, without the weight of social approval, without the fear of being judged as incomplete if they chose not to marry. What would change in your story if you could embrace love as a journey, not as a destination? Picture yourself in that alternate reality. You meet someone, you fall in love, and instead of the constant question, "When are you getting married?" you hear, "How are you two growing together?" Imagine how different relationships would feel if the focus were not on permanence, but on depth, not on securing the future, but on truly experiencing the present. The truth is, many of us carry a silent anxiety, the belief that if love does not lead to marriage, then it has somehow failed. This idea is not natural. It has been taught, reinforced, and repeated through centuries of tradition and expectation. But ask yourself, is the value of your love measured by whether it ends with rings and vows, or by the transformation it brought into your life? In this imagined scenario, the pressure dissolves. Instead of chasing the altar, you and your partner could ask deeper questions. How can we help each other grow into better human beings? What virtues can we cultivate together? What challenges can we face side by side? These questions point toward a love that is not about possession or security, but about mutual formation of character. And yet, here is the paradox. While this vision sounds liberating, most of us still find ourselves pulled back toward marriage. Not necessarily because we want the party or the ceremony, but because love itself awakens fears. Fear of abandonment, fear of instability, fear that without an external commitment, everything could vanish as quickly as it began. Marriage, in this sense, is less about celebrating love and more about containing it. So let me ask you, In your own relationships, how much of what you desire is truly yours, and how much comes from the silent expectations of others? What if love could remain love, intense, vulnerable, transformative, without needing to become marriage? Hold on to this thought, because in the next part we will confront an uncomfortable truth. Maybe marriage is not the natural expression of love at all, but a structure born precisely from love's fragility. We often repeat the story that marriage is the ultimate expression of love, that when two people decide to marry, it means their affection has reached its highest and purest form. But what if this belief is not only wrong, but dangerously misleading? What if marriage arises not from the strength of love, but from its weakness? Here is the disruptive insight. Love, as passion, is unstable. It burns brightly, but like any flame left uncontained, it consumes itself. What we call falling out of love is not usually betrayal or loss of interest. It is the natural fading of intensity once novelty disappears. And this is precisely where marriage enters the stage. Not as a celebration of passion, but as its substitute. Think about it. If love were naturally permanent, why would we need contracts, rings, and ceremonies to secure it? Do you ever sign a contract to guarantee your hunger will return tomorrow? Of course not, because hunger is constant, predictable. But with love, we feel compelled to bind ourselves, to create external structures, to anchor something we secretly know is fragile. This realization is uncomfortable because it dismantles one of our most cherished illusions. We want to believe marriage crowns love, when in reality it often rescues it from disappearing. Marriage steps in where love alone cannot endure. It transforms passion into duty, desire into responsibility, affection into alliance. And while this transformation may be necessary, it is not romantic, it is practical. Machiavelli, in his Reflections on Power, suggested that affection from the people is always fleeting. A wise ruler, therefore, does not rely only on being loved. He builds systems of loyalty and fear to sustain his authority. If this is true in politics, why would love in personal life be any different? Perhaps we marry not because we are overflowing with passion, but because passion alone cannot be trusted to carry us through the storms of life. This changes everything. Instead of seeing marriage as the natural destiny of love, we can begin to see it as a response to love's impermanence. Not a crown, but a cage. Not always cruel, but certainly necessary. Now ask yourself, does this perspective make you feel disillusioned or strangely relieved? Because if love is not eternal by itself, then maybe the failure is not yours. Maybe the very structure of marriage was invented to protect us from the truth we all sense, that passion, left unguarded, is destined to fade. To understand why love so often turns into marriage, we must listen to a voice that rarely appears in conversations about romance. Niccolò Machiavelli. Known for The Prince, he is often painted as cold and manipulative. But beneath his reputation lies a brutally honest insight about human nature. He argued that affection is fleeting, unreliable, and cannot serve as the foundation of lasting power. A ruler who relies only on being loved, Machiavelli warns, will quickly lose his throne. Now translate this into relationships. If love is as fragile as Machiavelli believed political affection to be, then it makes sense that societies across time have built structures, like marriage, to stabilize it. In politics, institutions preserve order. In love, marriage plays the same role. It turns unpredictable passion into predictable responsibility. It is not so much about deepening love as it is about securing it against inevitable decline. Think about the ceremonies, the vows, the public declarations. They are not just romantic rituals. They are symbolic acts of anchoring. They transform the private emotion of two individuals into a social contract acknowledged by family, law, and tradition. The message is clear. Love, left on its own, is too unstable to be trusted. It needs scaffolding. This perspective is not meant to belittle marriage, but to strip away its illusions. When we see it through Machiavelli's eyes, marriage is not the climax of romance, but the strategy of survival. It is love dressed in the clothing of duty, responsibility, and permanence. Without this transformation, many relationships would collapse under the natural weight of fading passion. Of course, Most of us don't like to admit this. We prefer the poetry of eternal love to the politics of fragile desire. But perhaps honesty is a better foundation for wisdom than illusion. And perhaps the real mistake is not that marriage tames love, but that we keep pretending it doesn't. So here is the challenge. If Machiavelli is right, then the strength of a relationship is not measured by how passionately it begins, but by how wisely it is structured. Love may ignite, but it is marriage, or something like it, that contains the fire. How does this strike you? Does it feel cynical, or does it feel liberating to finally name what so many of us already sense, but rarely dare to say out loud? Let's pull back the curtain and look at the dynamics most of us feel, but rarely put into words. At the start, love feels limitless. It seems like it will last forever because our bodies flood us with chemicals, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, that trick us into believing passion is eternal. We call it chemistry for a reason. But what happens when the rush fades? Slowly, love begins to reveal its fragility. Arguments arise not because affection disappears, but because expectations change. The lover who once wanted only presence now asks for commitment. The partner who once celebrated spontaneity now longs for stability. And beneath these changes is an invisible tension, the fear that without something binding us, the bond will dissolve. This is why patterns repeat across cultures and generations. Passion leads to attachment. Attachment leads to expectation. Expectation leads to the desire for permanence. And permanence, in human society, almost always takes the form of marriage. It's less about celebrating what is, and more about preventing what could happen. The slow erosion of intimacy once passion fades. We rarely admit this openly. Instead, we create stories. We're getting married because we love each other. But beneath that story lies a quieter truth. We're getting married because love alone feels too uncertain. This is not cynicism, it is honesty. Recognizing it frees us from disappointment when passion naturally weakens. Psychologists have observed this pattern as well. The honeymoon phase is biologically designed to fade, giving way to a calmer attachment. Couples who expect passion to remain unchanged often feel betrayed when it doesn't. Couples who understand the transition can see marriage not as a failure of love, but as its adaptation. Yet here is the invisible cost. When we turn love into marriage, we trade intensity for stability. We gain structure, but we lose some of the fire. Many people live in this tension, unsure whether to mourn the loss or embrace the gain. Think about your own experience. Have you ever confused fading passion with fading love? Have you mistaken stability for boredom or intensity for authenticity? These are the patterns shaping your choices, often without you noticing. And now, with these hidden dynamics revealed, we can begin to say things that cut to the bone. Statements that are not only true but unforgettable. Let's pause and name the truths we've uncovered in ways that are impossible to forget. These are not soft affirmations but sharp reminders, phrases that expose the reality behind our illusions. Marriage is not love's climax, but love's survival strategy. It doesn't crown passion, it rescues it from dying too soon. If love were eternal, we wouldn't need vows. We do not sign contracts for what we trust to endure on its own. Passion fades, but duty endures. This is why marriage is built less on desire than on responsibility. We don't marry because we are overflowing with love. We marry because we fear love's fragility. Behind the romance lies a quiet anxiety. The altar is not the stage of love's triumph, but the scene of its transformation. Love is remade, reshaped, domesticated. Notice how each of these statements challenges the way we've been taught to think. They do not diminish love, but they refuse to sentimentalize it. They point to a deeper, perhaps more dignified understanding. Love matures not by remaining passion, but by accepting form. And this is where so many people stumble. We cling to the illusion that passion should last forever, and when it doesn't, we feel betrayed. But the betrayal is not in love. It is in our expectation. Passion was never meant to carry the whole weight of life. It is a spark, not a structure. Marriage, then, is less about eternalizing passion, and more about giving it walls strong enough to survive the winds of time. Whether we see this as tragic or wise depends on how honest we are willing to be with ourselves. So let me ask you, which of these phrases resonates with your own story? Which one unsettles you or even makes you angry? Pay attention to that reaction, because often, the truths we resist most fiercely are the ones that have the most to teach us. And from here, we will step into the paradox. How can love and marriage feel so opposed and yet be inseparable? The answer may change how you understand both. Here lies the contradiction that defines so many of our lives. Love and marriage seem opposed, yet they are drawn together as if by gravity. Love thrives in freedom, unpredictability, and passion. Marriage thrives in order, duty, and permanence. On the surface, they look incompatible. And yet for centuries, one has almost always led to the other. Why? Think of it this way. Love without marriage is like fire without a hearth, brilliant, wild, but dangerous and short-lived. Marriage without love is like a hearth without fire, safe, structured, but cold and lifeless. Neither extreme satisfies the human heart. We crave both the flame of passion and the walls of security, both freedom and stability. This is the paradox. Love resists being tamed, but it also seeks protection. We fear that if left wild, it will die, yet if we confine it too tightly, it suffocates. So marriage becomes the uneasy compromise. It is the place where freedom meets duty, where desire submits to responsibility, where intimacy becomes not only private, but public. And here is the surprising truth. The tension between love and marriage is not a flaw. It is the very condition that makes relationships human. If love were pure freedom, it would vanish with the wind. If marriage were pure structure, it would feel like a prison. But when the two collide, they create the very struggle that shapes our growth. Writers from Tolstoy to Kierkegaard recognize this. Tolstoy showed us that passion without structure leads to ruin, while Kierkegaard warned that structure without passion leads to despair. Between these extremes, most of us walk a fragile line, trying to keep the fire alive without burning the house down. So perhaps the question is not whether love leads to marriage, but whether we can live with the paradox they create together. Can we hold both realities, the wildness of passion and the necessity of order, without betraying either? Can we accept that what feels like contradiction is, in fact, the very fabric of lasting love? Reflect for a moment. In your own story, do you lean more toward protecting the flame or toward containing it? And could the balance between the two be the real art of loving wisely? Because if so, then the tension you feel is not failure. It is exactly where you are supposed to be. If all of this sounds heavy, let's pause and uncover the gift inside the tension. Because here's the hopeful truth. When we stop expecting love to stay as passion forever, we free ourselves to discover something deeper, something steadier, quieter, and far more enduring. Think of it this way. Passion is intoxicating, but it is not always kind. It makes us restless, insecure, even obsessive. Stability, on the other hand, might seem dull at first, but it offers the soil in which something far richer can grow. Trust, companionship, a shared history. When passion fades, what remains is the opportunity for a different kind of love, one that is less about butterflies and more about roots. The promise is this: by embracing the transformation of love into marriage, or into any form of long-term commitment, we can discover a love that is not about possession or constant excitement, but about becoming better human beings together. This is where the true beauty lies. Not in clinging to the fire of passion, but in learning how to use it to warm a life built side by side. And here is the practical reward. When we shift our expectation, disappointment loses its grip. If you no longer demand that passion remain unchanging, you stop feeling betrayed when it softens. Instead, you can see it as an invitation to move into a new phase of love, a phase where responsibility and intimacy deepen, where loyalty takes root, and where two imperfect people build something larger than themselves. This does not mean the fire dies completely. In fact, paradoxically, when you stop demanding passion to be eternal, it often reappears in unexpected moments, rekindled not by novelty, but by the bond that years of commitment have forged. A look across the table, a memory shared, a laugh at the same old joke. These become sparks, precious precisely because they emerge against the backdrop of permanence. So the promise is simple but profound. If you embrace the reality of love's transformation, you will not lose love. You will gain something sturdier, something that can weather time. Ask yourself, are you chasing eternal passion? Or are you willing to let love mature into something wiser? Because the answer to that question determines whether you see marriage as a cage or as the garden where love learns to last. To make sense of everything we've been exploring, let's lay down a conceptual map. Think of love and marriage not as accidents of culture, but as two stages in a psychological and philosophical process. From psychology, we know that human attachment follows a pattern. First comes passion, then attachment, then commitment. Psychologist Robert Sternberg even called this the triangular theory of love, where passion, intimacy, and commitment form the three sides of a complete bond. Passion burns first, intimacy deepens with time, and commitment anchors the relationship when the fire begins to fade. Marriage, in this sense, is the institutional expression of commitment. It embodies the need to protect intimacy after passion has done its work. From philosophy, we see the same dynamic. Aristotle described friendship of virtue as the highest form of human bond, one where two people pursue goodness together. But he also knew that such friendship requires stability and character, not just emotion. Similarly, Kierkegaard wrote that love matures when it moves from desire to duty, not duty as drudgery, but duty as the conscious choice to remain faithful even when feelings waver. From history, we learn that marriage emerged not primarily as a romantic ideal, but as a social necessity. It organized property, family lines, and alliances. Romance was a late addition, layered over a much older structure. This explains why we often feel the gap between what marriage promises romantically and what it delivers practically. Put all this together, and we see the deeper truth. Love, left unstructured, is fragile. Marriage, left loveless, is hollow. But when passion, intimacy, and commitment align, marriage becomes more than a cage. It becomes a framework for growth. Not because it preserves the fire, but because it channels it into a shared life that neither person could build alone. This framework matters because it shifts the way we measure success in relationships. Instead of asking, "Do I still feel the same intensity?" we can ask, "Are we becoming better people together?" That is a question worthy of both philosophy and psychology, because it recognizes that love's highest purpose is not endless pleasure, but mutual transformation. And now we arrive at the closing moment, the invitation for you to step into this reflection, not just as an observer, but as part of a community wrestling with the same paradox. We began with a simple question: why does love so often lead to marriage? And together we uncovered a deeper truth, that marriage is not the natural climax of passion, but its transformation into something more enduring. Machiavelli's realism, psychology's patterns, and philosophy's wisdom all converge here. Passion alone cannot carry the weight of a lifetime. It must be reshaped into commitment, responsibility, and shared growth. But this does not mean love dies at the altar. It means love evolves. It means we stop demanding it stay forever as fire and instead learn to treasure it as both flame and foundation. Yes, the butterflies fade, but in their place comes something richer. A bond that weathers storms, a trust that deepens with years, a love that teaches us to turn from what I want to what we can become together. This is not the story you hear in fairy tales, but it may be the story that saves real relationships from despair. When you stop seeing the fading of passion as failure, you open space for a more human, more resilient form of love. The kind that doesn't just thrill but also sustains. The kind that is less about self and more about the other. So now the question turns back to you. Do you see marriage as a cage that tames passion, or as the garden where love learns to last? Your answer matters, not only for your relationships, but for how you approach life itself. Because at its core, this is not just about romance. It's about how we face impermanence, how we build meaning, and how we accept that beauty often requires structure. I want you to pause here and share in the comments. Has your own experience of love felt more like fire that burned out, or like roots that grew deeper? And if you've been married, or chosen not to marry, What has that decision taught you about the nature of love? If these reflections have stirred something in you, don't leave it here. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join a community of people wrestling with life's hardest truths. Because the journey of love, like the journey of character, is not one we are meant to walk alone. Take this thought with you. Passion makes love possible, but commitment makes love real. And in the end, perhaps that is the only story worth telling.